Echoes of Wisdom is the first mainline Zelda game where you are actually controlling Zelda. It's a weird concept for Nintendo. And despite the fact that this game has fantastic, open-ended puzzle solving, it also has a few major flaws. So let's talk about my experience playing Echoes of Wisdom, and the main design decisions that caused me the most frustration as a player. So a quick primer for those of us that have never heard of Echoes of Wisdom. This is a game where you are playing as Zelda, where you are summoning echoes of things that you have fought or have found in the world to do the dirty work for you. It takes place in the traditional isometric Zelda world, and it should have been a really interesting look at how someone gets through Hyrule without a sword and a shield. And I honestly think that if the game was designed from the bottom up without the sword and shield in mind, it would have been a really great game. There's just so much combat in this game. And when Zelda is this arbiter of true wisdom where they're using these echoes to do all the bidding and to solve all the puzzles, it's counterintuitive to have this much combat, especially when Zelda cannot directly attack. In order to take out even the most simple enemy, I have to spawn in at least a rock and throw it to do damage. Later in the game, when you have more intense echoes, you can summon an army of different creatures that go and attack instead. But no matter what, you are summoning something and then waiting for it to actually attack the thing that you want it to attack. This is really awkward because you take away the responsiveness of swinging a sword and dealing the damage, to instead having to press the same button and watch yourself summon this bokoblin, only for it to take about 10 seconds to throw its first spear, or to swing its sword for the first time. But they did get around this, and very early in the game, you actually get your own sword to swing. But Zelda can't swing a sword. No, this is the echo of Link's sword. And whenever you use this sword, you turn into Link, which only reinforces the fact that they definitely designed this entire game with Link being on the overworld. But what's to stop people from just becoming Link and then playing the game that way? Well, the sword has a power bar that can only be refilled with very specific blue crystals. This leads to a system where the sword play is definitely the most fun way to engage in combat, but you can't use the sword play for very long and you're constantly discouraged from using the sword play because you should save it for something that you actually need it for. Because honestly, the only way to replenish this sword bar is with blue crystals, and the only place you can find blue crystals is in the underworld. And that is why the underworld and the boss battles are by far the most fun part of this game. It's the only part of the game that was balanced around the fact that you should be ping-ponging between Zelda and Link. The bosses are spitting out blue crystals so that you can always turn into Link, but the bosses aren't actually vulnerable to Link's attacks until you are Zelda and trigger a certain puzzle condition. It's almost like at times you're playing two incredibly separate games. The overworld is where you should just be Link the entire time and you're exploring in the way that you would expect. And then in the underground is when you should control Zelda and have Link's sword as a backup option. But when you're taking that second stance and putting it in the overworld that was, again, so clearly designed around just Link being there, it completely breaks things for me. Just straight down to Zelda's inability to jump as high as Link makes things like needing to make a chain of beds so that you can get up the simplest ledges, to using a flying platform instead of doing all of these typical Link moves that I know from other games, take what should be and is a really innovative idea and kind of spoils it for me. Because let's be honest, I will say, and I will continue to say, the actual puzzles in this game are incredibly fun, because they're the parts of the game that are balanced around Zelda tackling a challenge. But what's disappointing is, again, every time that you need to do a puzzle, you have to be Link to clear out the room of all of the monsters first. Or even better, you could spawn in some AI that's going to do it for you, but then you're just literally standing in the corner waiting for the AIs to fight each other. But the thing about the puzzles that is neat and is simultaneously their biggest detriment is how many options you have to solve them. This game does give you a lot of different pieces so that you can solve puzzles in whatever way makes sense to you. But by giving the players so many options, everyone just found the things that makes them the most happy and then used them to solve 95% of the problems. My favorite pieces were the flaming blob that lights things on fire, the shooting jelly that shoots ice beams, and the giant spinning death machine that cleared out everything in the camp. Besides that, you obviously need to use the bed because it's the only way for you to really ascend vertically, and I liked the flying tile because it was really nice to just kind of see something across a giant gap, and then to hop on a tile to take you there. But that's only 5 of like 50 echoes that are in the entire game. And outside of very niche puzzles that exist only really when you get the echo, there's no real use to go back and call back to echoes that you previously had. My favorites just always served the job better because I had already thought about how I could do the puzzle with them. And these two main issues, namely a subset of items that you just rely on and really only ever use, and not being able to reliably go in and out of the sword play really come to a head in the final boss. And obviously this is going to be a spoiler, so proceed with caution if you care about this thing. In the final dungeon, Zelda gives Link back their sword. And you actually go through a really interesting dungeon where Zelda has to set up platforms and puzzles to make Link progress to hit switches and stuff. I don't mind this. Again, this design is really fun because Zelda's doing the brain work and Link is swinging the sword. But in the actual final boss, you are literally Zelda in a Link boss fight. You stand in a corner waiting for your one moment to shoot the equivalent of a light arrow to break something so that Link can keep hitting the boss. In this entire 5-minute boss fight, I spent most of my time summoning my one guy that I liked to fight with, and I watched that thing and Link spin on top of the main boss creature until it eventually died, while I stood in the corner, spinning in circles, dodging what little threat might be thrown my way in the meantime. So the main things that I'm taking away from this experience as I go and continue to look at designing my own games is I want to have an identity that is present throughout the entire game. If, as my main character, it feels bad to do combat, there should be less combat in the game. I'm also going to evaluate the use of power bars. If I have to limit something that is so fun to the equivalent of like a power bar, is it even worth having that power bar, or by an extension, that power-up in the game? Players like to use their power-ups, so we gotta make sure that that's accessible. But all of that being said, Echoes of Wisdom is still worth a play if you enjoy puzzle solving and can swallow watching other creatures do your fighting for you. That's really all I have to say about this one. Let me know what you thought of Echoes of Wisdom down in the comment section down below, and I'll see you next time. Have a fantastic day.